Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Decloak podcast. And today's guest is Kayne McGladrey, Field CISO of Hyperproof. Hi, Kayne. How are you?
Hi, Leo. I'm doing fantastic. So glad we can get together today.
Excellent. And likewise, I know that we've crossed paths over a mutual Slack group and obviously seen each other on LinkedIn and obviously be a fan of your work as well. So, yes, very happy to have you here. And to jump straight in, if you could give me a brief overview of you and your career, that would be excellent.
Okay. So I came into cybersecurity through I guess you could say, a non-traditional path. I'm a theater kid. Ultimately,
Okay.
that's my. I took high school theater thinking I was going to end up singing and dancing on Broadway,
Nice.
and I got into my first semester of college and realized there was no way I was going to make any money or be able to pay my rent or anything. And so I took the improvisational skills that I gained in theater and went, well, there's money in computers. Let's go find out about consulting jobs. And the first consulting job that I took, actually, the owner was fantastically cheap. He offered me half of market rate, and because I'd had no other possible interest based on my lack of formal education and lack of certifications, although certifications were not nearly so prominent in the 90s as they are today. He took a gamble. I was employee number four at a bootstrap startup doing government consulting, and immediately I had a massive amount of learning to do, but also I learned quite a lot about security at the first government contract that I worked on, where the government agency, and I can't say who it is, they were um, very happy about their investment in technology. So happy, in fact, that they took their brand new computer, their Deck Alpha. Now, for those viewers who don't know what a Deck Alpha is, think of a washing machine or a dishwasher and put it on casters and then put a terminal on top of it with a keyboard. They put that in the lobby of their brand new, shiny office building. And you didn't need a username to log in. You didn't need a password to log in. You could just be a member of the public, wander on in, and ultimately edit your pension or someone else's pension. And this troubled me a lot because you could see there was the immediate opportunity to ruin someone's life or to unfairly enrich your own with no perspective that security was a thing. You didn't even need remote access. You could, their office hours were 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, closed government holidays. That really changed my attitude. And I saw that throughout in other organizations that I worked with as well, where there was a perceived lack of security as being a necessary business function, or that it was somehow it was always seen as a cost center that money went into and ultimately tears and data breaches came out of. I remember doing a contract. Again, I've done a lot of consulting over the years. I'll talk about being a CISO in a minute, but before I became a CISO, I remember doing a contract in Amsterdam where they brought me in because there had been a data breach and they were rightly wanting to resolve the issues. And I wanted to ask them, okay, so in order to um, control access to your systems, let's see who has access to your systems. And they wouldn't disclose that over email. They wouldn't disclose that over the phone. We have to get here and talk about this. They brought in an international team. And the problem was that the only username they used was root. And they used it in their dev environment. They used it in their prod environment, and they used it on their trading floor. And that wasn't actually the big problem that had happened. Is somebody had just wandered into one of their trading floors. There was no idea of a key card or a badge or a physical key. They'd logged in as root, made a couple $1 million in trades, and wandered away, and then done the same thing in Australia and some
Wow.
similar activity in the EU. And they were like, yeah, we should probably fix that. And by the way, like, maybe we should have some user logins too. You just go, okay, this how did you get so far as an adult grown-up business company to actually have that lack of perception? But the thing is, they were just making money. And I habitually run towards problems. I had the opportunity to take a job as a CISO in a defense industrial based manufacturing company where we did both commercial contracting as well as doing government contracting for various agencies that would have us build prototypes of various things. And the interesting thing there was taking a company from having a managed service provider where it was entirely outsourced with no inbuilt, to building, staffing, and maintaining an internal team with the conscious knowledge that anything we do on the commercial side will have commercial penalties, possibly civil penalties, and on the Department of Defense side, there's criminal penalties right there. Like you think about solar winds, and you think about the current SEC enforcement actions. You don't go to Club Fed if you make a mistake in that case. And in my role as CISO there, it was definitely a Club Fed outcome. So after having got them to a good state where it was stable and moving, I got bored. I won't lie, I got bored. The last job I took before I came to Hyperproof, it's interesting. I was doing executive advisory work for CISOs and boards, and the reason they'd bring me in was only one of two reasons: either the board thought the CISO was sandbagging it, or
Yeah.
the CISO was anxious that the board thought they were sandbagging, and they wanted to get a second opinion of their overall cybersecurity maturity. And that could be aligned to NIST CSF, that could be aligned to CIS CSC, don't care, like any framework. And what we ended up building at that firm was not only an engine to do audits and assessments, because that's not really interesting. The more interesting thing we tried to figure out is, how do you effectively measure psychometric elements? Like from the time that we sent them the DRL or the ERL, document request list or evidence request list, to the time that we got it, how much did they panic, and how much was how adequate and how sufficient were the documents that they sent? Like, did they actually understand what we'd requested them? And we were working on scaling out this horror show in Power BI and inevitably Excel, because we had to ingest all of that. My friend Matt says, hey, so we're working on this company idea where we want to have an easy way for companies to work with their auditors and work with their assessors to share evidence. And we also want to make it easy for them to continuously evaluate how effective a control is at reducing its risk. Because that's why we have controls. We don't have them because they're fun. We have them because they allow us to enter new business markets, or they allow us to reduce the risks to our business. And when Matt said, well, that's what we're going to do, and we're calling it Hyperproof, I was like, cool. That sounds like a problem that I could help at scale, because as I've seen throughout my career, there's a lack of communication between the business and the CISO to say, here's how effectively we are doing our job. We had the theory that it would be possible for companies at scale to evaluate how effectively their controls were reducing risks, and that ultimately that would help them move into new markets. Because what I've seen is the number of attestations and certifications that companies are now required to have has either become a competitive differentiator, or alternatively, it's getting like, when my kids were young, they'd want to go on the roller coaster and, it'd say you have to be at least this tall to ride, and they weren't that tall. And I think that that's where we are right now with SOC 2. We're approaching that, SOC 2 Type 2. So that's really what I get excited about at Hyperproof, is helping to break down the communications barriers between executives about the value of cybersecurity and the value of pursuing these certifications and attestations, but also in helping reduce the risks to those businesses.
I think that's a really good point, and something that comes up a lot in the podcast is the translating the why and the ultimate, basically the justification for security, and ultimately gaining trust. And during your career, is there any tips that you've you could share with people, or any items you've come across that you went, I think we've cracked this, in terms of why we need security, why security is a business enabler and not a business disabler?
So I think the first and foremost one is, go have a coffee with your attorney. Make the time, and that's irrespective of what level of the organization that you work in. Especially if you're in the incident response chain, if you're the IC incident commander, or if you're an incident responder, or if you're the CISO, please go have coffee with your attorney. And the reason I say that is, in tabletop exercises, which I've run before, but also in live fire exercises, well, not exercises, they've just been things that have happened, where the CISO or where the incident commander has never met the attorney before, even casually, just for 15 minutes, the attorney walks in or counsel walks in, and everybody thinks they're going to get sacked. They think it's just done. Like, we've never met this person. They have a scary job title. We know what they do. They're going to just send us out the door. And by having that coffee early on or just establishing some kind of a working relationship, it really diffuses that. But the other thing that it gives us, and this is a fairly rare but unpleasant scenario, is if you have compromised communications where the comms channels that you're using in during incident response are being either intercepted or actively engaged with by the threat actor, you don't know who you're talking to, and you can't actually confirm that that's the attorney, and that's a bad situation that you find yourself in. So again, go make friends with counsel. The second thing I think that companies really need to do at an organizational level is understand why they have controls. And if you can, as an executive, I'll start there. If you can tie it to either top line revenue or bottom line cost, easy day. If you can tie it to, well, we did the zero trust because the artificial intelligence, because blockchain, bingo, right? Nobody just understands. Nobody cares. That's what you sound like. You have to either tie it to a top line cost. A good friend of mine recently, like regularly gets questioned by members of the executive leadership team of why do we have to spend $500,000 on these controls? And there's like 3 controls. She's like, well, do you like $1 billion? What do you mean, do you like $1 billion? I mean, who doesn't like? Well, that's what those 3 controls allow us to have is a contract with the federal government that's worth about $1 billion. Do we like having $1 billion? But if you instead say, well, we need these controls because EDR, if you use technical parlance, it fails. It's a bad time. You don't want to do that. So I think that learning to talk the language of business, and then for people who aren't in executive roles, I think you really have to be able to showcase the value that you're bringing to the company. And that's not that you ran the EDR platform. That's not that you did investigations. That's not that you did identity management. What top line control did it map to? And then did it reduce risk? If you can make that as an individual contributor, your performance reviews go a lot better because people understand, oh, you're making an impact to the business. You're not just showing up and doing some technical thing that I don't quite understand, but boy, that long password is annoying. And is that your fault? We want to pivot away from that language.
I love that. It's very, very sage advice. And one of the things obviously you mentioned about was the non-conventional route from being, theatre, obviously into technology and then subsequently security. Is there any advice that you would give to people coming from a non-conventional background and how they could utilize those skills and even give that example of, obviously you mentioned improvisation. Is there any other elements that you've learned from that non-traditional background moving into cyber?
I've actually hired a lot of people from non-traditional backgrounds, and I think there's probably 2 things. And the first I'm going to say is pay it forward. I think that's if you came into cybersecurity from a non-traditional background, please pay it forward so that others like us who come from a different set of life experiences and a different set of educational experiences. And the reason I say that is like one of the best malware analysts I ever hired was a classical violinist. Loved doing puzzles, loved picking things apart, was insanely patient, could pick apart malware like you would not believe, no technical background, just was given the basic tools and understood, oh, this is a puzzle and this is how I can use these tools to pick this puzzle apart. She loved it, right? And I think that we need to look at stories like that and experiences and say, this is a person who does not have 16 different certifications and does not have a master's degree and yet can absolutely perform. So I think that that's the thing, and paying it forward, looking at aptitude and attitude and their ability to get the job done rather than their ability to pass tests. I think that's one of the first things. And then for those who are looking at getting in through a non-traditional background, talk about your aptitudes. Talk about what you like doing. And if an employer is demanding that you have 27 years of Kali Linux experience and that you have had a CISSP for 15 years now, and also you have a Purple Heart in order to get a $15 an hour internship, run away. Do not engage. Do not pursue those jobs. And I say that because there's the perception that we have this skills gap in cybersecurity. And I think it's partially caused by rewarding those jobs, by people actually applying to those jobs that are unrealistic. And I understand the point of HR is they're trying to mitigate the risk of a bad hire and mitigate that by having the best possible candidate, which often means unreasonable things. But if you're at a non-traditional background, don't go after those jobs. Don't feel bad for not going after those jobs. And also look at startups, look at smaller companies that are more nimble, more agile. And actually, at this point, you can even look at, if you're in the United States, you can look at the federal government, because they finally said, well, you do not need a bachelor's degree, you do not need a 4-year college degree to do a cybersecurity job, because they've realized we don't have enough applicants at this point. Like, it's an own goal. Can we fix this? And that's how they've chosen to fix it.
Nice, I like it. And then, speaking of career, if you could run me through some of the challenges that you've experienced, throughout your career, either that could be personally, that could be professionally. I think, I think we could strike some gold here with the challenges that you've probably faced, Kayne, given you're very active online as well. Yeah.
Oh boy, I've got 2 or 3 that immediately spring to mind, so we'll see how many of them we get through.
Yeah.
So the first one that comes to mind, and in my intro, you asked me to talk about myself. I get bored easily.
Yeah.
I get bored easily, and I run towards new problems, because as soon as I feel like I've learned everything there is to learn about a given problem space, I immediately find it boring and end up going, okay, well, what else is going on in the world that's interesting to go attack? Because I like solving new things. It has been a career challenge, because even though I publicly rail against CISOs who change jobs every 2 years, if you were to go look at my career history, you'd go, yeah, you are not modeling. It's like being a parent, do as I say, not as I do, ultimately, right? I think that's been a challenge that I have, in that I often will just move on, and I go, okay, so this is no longer a fun challenge for me. Right now, I don't think I have that challenge, because I'm working on cultural issues in addition to technology issues. And I think that's this intersectionality of law and regulation and technology, I get super excited about every day. Second thing that I think that comes to mind is travel, actually. Though not so much these days, but historically it has been challenging. When I was running worldwide professional services, I had 1 year where I did 300 nights in hotel. And that was kind of the high water mark. And I was like, I could probably step it down a bit. That was a big year. And, you try to get it under 200 in hotel. And now I think I'm down to under 80 nights a year in hotel, maybe under 60, not sure. It's much better. And the reason that I say that is that if you get into a job where if you're young, if you don't have a lot of expenses and you don't have an extensive family, right, it's very easy to take a job where you travel every day. And that is, for some people, it can be very rewarding. But as we mature and as we change over time, that can become really challenging. Although, funny enough, actually, when I started traveling less, my marriage collapsed. And I'll say that because she wasn't used to having me around. That was just one of those things. We were just up in each other's pockets all the time, and it didn't work out. Funny enough, I know a lot of married couples who love the fact that they both travel, but for me, didn't work out. But net, I think that's been a positive. Final challenge that I have, and so you get an email from Google, and it's not the email that anybody ever wants to get from Google, and it's about advanced persistent threats engaging with your account. If anybody ever gets that email, first of all, it's the race you don't want to run. It's the prize you do not want to win. When you're told, like, emphatically by them that you should probably take the same protections that civil rights activists and political figures and investigative reporters have to take, it sucks. It sucks so hard. I can't have normal accounts. I can't have normal passwords. I can't have nice things. I had to disconnect pretty much everything outbound facing on the internet that I had for infrastructure because problems. And I had to get before multi-factor authentication, physical-based authenticator keys were super popular. I had to get on that train, not because I wanted to, but because the risk was substantive if I did not. So I think that's the other challenge that I really run into, is that my version of the internet is a very different version of the internet than most other people's.
Yeah, and I don't know if many CISOs or cyber leaders are faced with the same type of challenges, but again, with the advancement of things like social engineering, account takeovers, you'd be surprised how many CISOs probably don't cover their back and don't think about physical tokens and multiple other things, because people clearly target them because they'll have master admin or whatever it may be, or they're a high profile individual working for an agency or whatever. But yeah, I'm interested. So how long did that last for? Is that now just
Oh,
the norm?
that's now my ongoing.
Okay.
This doesn't. Once North Korea or China or Russia take an interest in you, and it's not like they're going to at some point forget, and that's not fun. And I had to think through, like, we talk about supply chain and third party risk. There is nothing more fun than getting your. How old is my mother? She's. We'll say she's over the age of 70, probably in the low 80s. Anyhow, hi mom. Had to get her on Signal. That's a whole
Okay.
thing, right? Try and get your imagine putting your grandmother on Signal,
Yeah.
because I wanted to have a guaranteed and like way of communicating that would not be compromised very easily. And the reason why is there are so many of these scams that target the elderly, and it's the
Yeah.
phone call that comes from a deep fake, which there is a lot of audio and video of me in the world, and you see that is being used and it's being weaponized to drain people's bank accounts. And so now the rule is inside, like, my family group, like, hey, the only way I'm calling you is on Signal. I will not call you on a phone. There is no such thing in my life, because it doesn't have a verifiable way of knowing that this is me. But the challenge of getting somebody, with that level of technology understanding, and she's pretty good, to get like, hey, you're going to get a new device and it's going to have all of these additional security things. It's not fun. I do not recommend.
Let's talk about something that might be keeping you awake at night: cybersecurity. According to Vanta's latest State of Trust report, it's the #1 concern for UK businesses. That's where Vanta comes in. Whether you're a startup, growing fast, or already established, Vanta can help you get ISO 27001 certified and more without the headaches. Vanta allows your company to centralize security workflows, complete questionnaires up to 5 times faster, and proactively manage vendor risks to help your team not only get compliant, but stay compliant. Stop stressing over cybersecurity and start focusing on growing your business in 2025. Check out Vanta and let us handle the tough stuff. Head to vanta.com/decloak to learn more. Because when it comes to your business, it's not just about keeping the lights on, it's about keeping everything secure. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that. Like, look at the emergence of deepfake. There was a CFO, you're probably familiar with that case, and I think it was it 10, 20 million that they effectively were trapped into because of deepfake. And you look at the Tom Cruise deepfake. I was doing a YouTube promotion for a video and they refused to promote it because of presidential election campaign.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, this is a man who looks at Tom Cruise using deepfake, pretending to run for president, and but the AI obviously picks up on it. It's like, this is a real thing. And when you apply that technology towards like taking your information or your likeness and then maybe calling a colleague or sourcing family members, these things are real world problems. And I think people think, it's like a TV show or a movie. It's like these things are actually happening. And clearly, obviously, you're being targeted and these things. I think the audience will like to hear this because, again, it is real. There's a sense of realism behind these things. So, yeah, it's
there is, and like,
yeah.
one of the things that I keep tracking is in Maryland. There is a case. Damon Darien, I believe is the gentleman's name. And what happened is the principal of a high school was accused of making racist and anti-Semitic remarks based on a recording that was shared on Twitter. And the police picked it apart. They realized that now this was after the principal was put on administrative leave. Like, he's no longer the principal of I think it was a high school. He was just basically run out on, like, the community was not happy because they didn't understand that this is a deep fake. The police picked it apart, figured out it was a deep fake, figured out that it was by, allegedly, by, I want to say it's Damon Darien is the gentleman's name. And he was allegedly unhappy because he wasn't promoted and because of he fired somebody without cause. There's a whole bunch of additional details there. But what you look at is there's no criminal code that says that you can't make a deep fake of another person. Now,
Yeah.
in the United States, there's one that says if they're running for president, there's another one that says, and this is state's law, that if it's non-consensual pornography, but if it's just two people doing their day job, doing whatever, the worst criminal penalty that the suspect can face in this is 6 months or a $2,500 fine. 6 months in prison, 20 because for disrupting a school proceeding. That's the limit of our criminal code. And I think about that because you can easily ruin somebody's life, and there's no related criminal penalty right now. And sure, you can do a civil suit, but if you're doing a civil suit, like you could get $1 billion out of somebody. They don't have $1 billion. They don't have $1 million. There's not really a co-measured control there. So I think that's something that as we get into the future, after we get past our current election cycle, at least here in the United States, but also in Europe, I think there's going to be an additional look at that from a legislative perspective of what do we need to do about this so that people don't get their lives wrecked? People like us who do podcasts, who are on video, there is a higher degree of risk that I don't think any of us signed up for.
I know, and it's another thing that we need to just keep an eye on it and look over our shoulder. And I guess if no laws do change, it's probably because people benefit from it for political reasons, campaigns, whatever it may be, to slander folk. And yeah, it's some scary stuff. So yeah, Kayne, moving on to the topic you want to discuss that needs relevance and cleaning up within the industry.
I think that the one that I want to go towards is my current space that I'm in, which is the adversarial relationships between GRC teams and cybersecurity teams. And also the larger narrative of how CISOs can be affected by good GRC or by poor GRC. And does that work for you as a topic?
I love this. I am strapped
Okay.
in because this was something on a podcast that we've recorded recently, and there is a huge issue. And there's also a major push now. It seems like the world's changed towards being more positive on GRC. But if people have a conflict, that information can be disseminated in a way that could be very harmful in terms of the outcome for the business and any kind of control weakness and failure that may get exploited. So yes, please, yeah.
Okay, so the way I look at it, I'm going to overly simplify this thing. When I started looking at this space, what differentiates a CISO from having a good outcome from a GRC program and a less good outcome from having a GRC program is if they hired somebody from the Big Four to run their GRC program. And it's a cyber poverty line that I'm seeing ultimately here, where if you don't have somebody who's done audits and assessments and who has not seen the broad spectrum of terrible and good for GRC, then inevitably what they're doing is a checkbox-based exercise, typically in Excel, where they're trying to meet the minimum required, but they don't actually understand the consequences of that. And often GRC as a business process is not under the control of the office of the CISO. So they are ultimately the recipient of whatever comes out of that process. And if it's a good process where they can have a good alignment of their controls to how it's burning down their risk stack, then it's better than if they don't. Because if you don't have that ability, first of all, you can get locked out of markets because you can't maintain or get certifications to actually show to your supply chain that you're trustworthy, which in business-to-business sales tends to matter. But also, if we look at what the Security and Exchange Commission is doing lately, Section 13B2B of the Security Exchange Act of 1934, which I love just thinking like that's been out there for 90 years. They're using that to beat people around the ears for their perceived control deficiencies. Because what the SEC is seeking to do, it seems to be two things. In that case, they're trying to say a computer is an asset. Not money is an asset, because that's an accounting regulation that says, hey, you need to have good accounting systems and you need to have good controls around your accounting systems because money. And these days they're trying to say, well, it's an asset because it affects your stock price and it affects how investors would look at you. And we saw that happen with R.R. Donnelley right now, which for $2.125 million settled with the SEC because of control deficiencies, right? Mm-hmm. But also we're seeing that in the case of Tim Brown in SolarWinds, where again, it's that specific, 19B, Section 2B, right? Where Tim Brown is being held up and made an unfortunate example of SolarWinds, even though SolarWinds cooperated with all of the government agencies, even though they, they submitted all the possible things that they could do to try and be helpful. They're now facing this suit from the Security and Exchange Commission that says, look, you had poor controls. We see a security statement on your website that says you've got these great controls. Who the heck wrote the security statement? Did the CISO ever see that? Was that somebody in marketing wrote? Like the idea that a company can be held to that level of accountability without having an internal backstop that says, we shouldn't have published that, or we should make sure that we're lining and covering on what we're publishing and what our public statements are versus our internal stance. I think that's what the SEC is trying to get at, and to a lesser extent, the FTC and in the EU, the CGAU. They're trying to get at the same root problem. But the challenge is, if companies don't see cybersecurity as a competitive advantage, if they don't see it as anything other than this increasing regulatory burden, they're going to do the minimum required, and they're going to have additional pushes from regulatory agencies to drive changes that are becoming increasingly prescriptive. Like I think 20, 30 years ago, I think of that terminal I walked up to. There was no username, there was no password. I suggested maybe that's a thing we should do, and there was no, I was young in my career, I didn't know how to make a business justification for it. And I think there were enough people like me 20 or 30 years ago now that this is why we're getting where we're going, because we didn't make the case for security back then. And now we're decades in, and the regulators are seeing, well, there's just more data breaches. So we're going to start, they started asking and saying, you should have these things. Now they're saying you will have these things, and no business likes to be told what to do. And then pivoting it back to like how CISOs get affected by this, if they can't incentivize, if there is no reason for the GRC team to be engaged with by the cybersecurity team, like is it on your performance report? Is it on your annual performance report that you were nice to the GRC team when they said, can we have a screenshot? Is it on the GRC team's performance goals that they had to pester the information security or cybersecurity team daily for evidence of control operation? Like nobody got into this business for these reasons. And so when I look at that, I think as auditors and assessors, we collectively forgot computers can copy files. Right? Like we had this manual idea that, well, for it to be real evidence, you have to go copy the file somewhere, and you have to ask a person to copy the file or to take this. It's absolutely insane. And that's why I'm currently with Hyperproof, where we're saying we can automate that. And not only can you just automate the control inspection, but you can all like the evidence collection, but you can also inspect it. It does not take a human who wants to sign up for a job where you look in a spreadsheet and you see, is there a checkbox? And that's your day job, and you do that all. That's a thing that you should have a computer do. We should have been doing this for years now. And if you then can report that up to the business, if you can say, well, here are the risks that we have associated with our controls. Here's why we have these controls. Here's how effectively our controls are operating. As a CISO, I look at that, and if I can see that a control is being consistently inspected, if I have sampling over 365 days, and if it's operating every day, when I'm going to have a renewals conversation with a vendor, it's a very easy renewals conversation. But if it's been operating kind of half and half, or maybe not so much, I'm either going to demand free professional services or a reduction in cost, or bin them and find a competitor, which translates to a business savings that I'm immediately going to go talk to my board about. And when I go talk to my cyber insurer, I'm going to say, look, here's how we're effectively managing our risks. Do not send me your litany questionnaire. Here's how our controls are operating. What do you think? What's our insurance rate going to be like rather this year, as opposed to our current mechanism, which is fundamentally broken But again, it comes down to that good relationship and non-adversarial relationship between GRC and cyber, where anything that can be automatically done should be, so that people can focus on larger topics. Like when I was doing executive advisory, we could ingest the evidence, we could evaluate the evidence automatically, and that would allow the analysts to focus on the harder thing of, so does the company have a priority of cybersecurity? Is there a culture of cybersecurity here? That's not something you can automate. There's no like one piece of evidence you can go, oh yeah, they're clearly committed. No, that's a whole lot, and that those holistic problems, I think that's what we need to go after as an industry, rather than this like, oh, does it have the right checkbox in the right? No, that's stupid. Let's move on past that.
I completely agree, and I guess it allows for more harmony between GRC teams and security, and they have the commonality of something like automation when it comes to GRC. Then everyone's a stakeholder, part of that life cycle. So then it's easier to get what they need when it comes to like evidence collection or verification or something when it comes to control. And yeah, I completely agree. And I don't think it's something that's been covered yet on the podcast. So I hope that we get lots of different feedback and comments on this. And it's definitely a topic that will get a lot of chatter. And then
the other part on this that I want to add into that is the
Please.
other part of it. In researching this, I found out there's not a GRC maturity model that's widely adopted. I ended up getting a really big cup of coffee and reading all of the research, and found out only after I went deep down the rabbit hole. There's one GRC maturity model. It's existed for 20 years. It's been adopted by 150 companies worldwide. That is not a big success story. It's very theoretical. I've done executive advisory work. I understand that a lot of things work in theory and that they don't work in practice. And so something that I'll be revealing, dropping, unleashing on the world. I have 180 pages of GRC maturity model that I wrote because I've had the privilege of working across a lot of industries on a lot of continents to see, here's what good GRC looks like. Here's what, here's how to improve. And here are practical tips of like, what do you need to do? But you can't say, well, get better at GRC, because that's like saying, Leo, get better at health. You're going to say, what the hell does that mean? Like, does that mean that I should go for a run? Does that mean I should sleep better? Does that mean that I should have a glass of wine at the end of the day? Like, what does get better at health mean? So I had to break it down and decompose, like, what is governance? Well, that's policies, right? What is risk management? What's the cycle of risk management? And then in things like crisis management, that's not classic cybersecurity, but if you have poor crisis communications, you are going to have a bad time, right? And then what is compliance? Like, how do we do compliance with legal and with regulatory and other attestations? And then how do we make this scalable and not detrimental to the business? Anyway, so I've developed it. It's we're hoping we'll release it in August. This is June as we're recording right now. I'll have it up on my LinkedIn. I'm hoping that it'll be, it's 180 pages basically of text, so I expect the finished product is going to be a lot more. But then we're going to do some webcast and live speaking about it, because I feel that if we don't have a way of saying, here's what good looks like, we have no roadmap to get towards good, and we all keep doing the same thing, and we end up wanting to hire somebody from a big four, and they only hire, it's like there are only so many people that graduate out of those spaces. And it, again, I can't imagine not wanting to have that as a CISO, because it gives you defensibility and it gives you a version of the future that you can actually sign up for, as opposed to, hey, I'm going to take unlimited civil risk, and I'm going to have poor alignment, and I'm going to have lousy mental health, and I have no control of my fate. I mean, who wants that as a job?
I know,
so
and it makes complete sense.
To work towards it.
And we will obviously we'll plug the link as well, so people can obviously download it and hopefully get acquainted with it, because we need a change in this space. So we'll absolutely plug it as well. And then yes, the one thing in cyber you think is BS and needs focus or needs change.
So I'm going to double down on something one of your prior guests said, which is around certifications.
Okay.
And I say that even though if you look back there, I do have the one, CISSP, and then I've got my senior membership in the IEEE, but that's a whole different thing. And boys, you think getting a CISSP is hard. Try being a senior member. But I do think that the overemphasis in certifications is a problem, and it's not for an obvious reason. If I paid for it once, if I could keep that up on my wall and have it be valid perpetually, well, yeah, it's not so bad. I have
Yeah,
a friend
agreed.
who does network administration, has a major networking vendor. They have certifications. He has, I think, 6 of them. He has to spend a lot of his time at home studying to keep his certification valid. And he has to spend a lot of his own money, which is not paid for by his employer, to keep
Mm.
those certifications valid. And so for
Yeah,
him, it is upwards of what, $1,500, $2,000 a year to keep his certifications valid so that his employer can see that he still should be able to have a job. Like, that blows my head up that that's the attitude that companies take, that in order to get in the door, people who, and this is especially challenging for people who are coming from a non-traditional background, like
yeah,
they don't know that the certifications exist and they might not have the finances to go acquire all of them just to begin with. And then on an ongoing basis, that there's a penalty or a fee for having a day job. Like, that is unfair. My friend Carmen is working on that problem with her 100 Women in 100 Days in Cyber program. She was just on my podcast earlier, which is what makes me think of it, where it's how can we fund people from non-traditional backgrounds or underrepresented um,
yeah,
types of people. How can we get them in, and how can we get them to stay in? Are there grants that people can get to get the certifications? But I think that ultimately it's become a profit making mill. I think,
yeah,
Leo, you probably saw AI certifications came out middle of 2023. Like, AI had been on the community zeitgeist for about 3 or 4 months. Like, OpenAI is this amazing tool and it's going to do all these things, and you have certified prompt engineer. Say what? And this is going to be a $300 certification that you can go get, or you've got an AI risk manager, and you go, what now? There's like no empirical data that this is based on. This is like, it could be a full-on ChatGPT hallucination that wrote it for all we know. But this is what the industry does, is we promote these things that sometimes they show you're really good at doing a test, but they don't show you're good at doing your job. And we keep forcing that cost on people. One of my friends who used to be the CISO over at VMware has no certifications. She just straight up believes they are poison in our industry.
yeah,
I have the one because I found it funny when I took it. Kind of like years ago, I got I was a Unix administrator at the time, and I got the MCSE, which at the time we joked was the must consult someone else. And the reason I got it is they said TCP/IP networking was an elective, and I was like, oh, cool. So this little windowing system is going to say that networking is an elective. Yeah, I'm going to go have some fun with that. And you learn, like, how do I pass this test? Since then, in the 25 plus years, my attitude really hasn't changed. In a lot of the certifications, they don't measure aptitude, but they do cost people money, and they do take them away from things that they'd like to be doing in their spare time when they're not working. So I think that does need to change.
yeah. I mean, obviously, I think in the previous episodes we went in a bit of a tangent on it and rant, and I think while I appreciate the discipline to learn that knowledge, then in some capacity apply it, it just, I think, doesn't resonate the cost. I think it's crazy. I actually worked with a person who was a mentor of mine many, many years ago. They had 7 acronyms, so SISM, CISP, you name it, but their practical application of the knowledge just wasn't there. I mean, if they could recite paragraph 5 of page 10 of whatever, you're like, well, that's great in a kind of monolithic bank where you're only really doing risk assessments and you're like, I know a few things about middleware and, you can apply, I don't know, networking switches and whatever it may be. But the actual, if someone said, hey, can you actually help me with this? Or can you network or a gateway or bypass this, whatever, they couldn't do it. Their main stretch was Excel spreadsheet and seeing what an inherent residual risk was. And it's like, but again, that's systemic to like a kind of prehistoric era. But obviously there are certifications where it opens up maybe a part of the brain where you're like, this is super interesting because I never knew this before, or I kind of knew.
Mhm.
And then people go down the track of obviously educating themselves and going through training. But yeah, like the who are the guys that have the most expensive certs? Is it GAIAC is one of the certs? I'll need
Oh
to
yeah, I
Google
think I've
this.
looked at that one. There are some expensive certifications out
Like
there.
$7,500 or something, or
Mm-hmm.
8,000. Like, but then I remember back in the day, people said if you had CISP, it's like the equivalent of I don't know, an honours degree or a bachelor's degree.
Oh no, in the UK, it's apparently it's allegedly a master's degree. So that's kind of part of
Yes.
my joke of having it there is like clearly I've done my postdoc work. There we go.
Yeah. So again, I think it's also quite off-putting for people coming into an industry where they may get some advice and someone says, "Hey, you need these 5 certs, or you need this, or you need CompTIA or CEH," and then people are like, I don't know, because it is a huge expense, and I don't know if it will ever change. I think it will get worse because people are obviously taking advantage. There's apparently 3 million people skills gap in the industry, and it's like, well, is there really? So I guess, for me as a hiring manager, the CISO, probably much like yourself, Kayne, is, I think it's about heart. I think it's about people's interest and desire to learn. And if we as mentors can try and take people on that journey, then in turn, if they wish to decide to go for certs or go for more advanced things, then that pathway could open up for them. But I know so many people that have came out of like university and went straight in, and you're like, and the only job they seem to get is in the Big Four, ironically.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Ironically, yeah.
they'll lap that up, but at the end of the day, you'll just be 10 years just writing reports for people, or McKinsey types. So, but anyway, yeah. Any closing thoughts on that then, Ken?
So I think the two things that I counsel folks on is if you're considering a certification, I recommend cyberseek.org. So that's the word cyber and then the word seek and then .org. And I say that because it is not being run by a vendor that's trying to sell you certifications. It's like, if you get this certification, here's what your career path could look like. Or if you want to get into this career, here are the certifications, but also here's how many open jobs there are for that. Which, if you're really looking at this in a problem space of like, where do I get my most value for my money? If you're going to spend that money, what's going to land you a job? I find that CyberSeek is really good. But the other thing that I tell folks is, if you're getting into it, if you're thinking of taking a career path, a different career path, or expanding in your current one, and you think that involves certifications, learn the skills that are required, have practical hands-on applicability of that. And goodness knows these days there's a lot of online available resources where you can work in virtual environments to simulate things, right? There's capture the flag exercises, there's virtual networking exercises. A lot of this is available. Go learn the hands-on of it. And then when you're applying for jobs, if the employer wants you to have the certification, say, look, I've got the skills, I've been planning to take the cert. If I get the certification, is that going to result in a job? And if they're like, yeah, totally, we'll totally do that, cool, easy day. But if they're like, well, don't go spend $7,000 for your own money. Right, just don't. It doesn't make any sense. Like, there are enough employers out there that will see that you have the ability to do the job and that you have the desire and you've got the right personality type to do the job, that are not going to then say, well, you have to go spend a few $1,000s of your own money to get certifications. Right, that's just punitive. So I think that's where I'll leave the certification one aside.
Excellent. And yeah, what we'll do then, Kayne, is we'll wrap up. And again, thank you so much for your time. Everyone, please follow Kayne. There's lots and lots of activity online. We'll obviously put everything in the description, and we'll share it on LinkedIn. That's the most central place that I obviously share the content. And yeah, please like, share, subscribe. And again, thanks again for your time, Kayne. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on the show, Leo. It's been fun.